Clint Eastwood, the 94-year-old actor and director, unexpectedly found himself at the center of a deeply human drama. He hadn't come here to shoot another Western or give lectures about Hollywood's golden age. Clint simply wanted silence, a break from noisy Los Angeles, where people constantly recognized him. But fate had other plans. That morning, April 5, 2025, he was sitting on a bench in a small park not far from downtown. His old baseball cap shaded half his face, and his worn denim jacket made him look like just another retiree. Nearby, palm trees rustled, and somewhere in the distance, cars buzzed along the I-10. Clint reached for a pack of cigarettes, then stopped. His doctor had been complaining about his lungs for over a year. He just sat there, listening to pigeons coo over someone's leftover sandwich, when he suddenly heard a tiny voice. Are you Clint Eastwood?" asked a small girl standing a few steps away. She couldn't have been more than 10, skinny, with messy dirty blonde curls sticking out from under a pink hat. Her jeans were stained, and her sneakers were so worn that the soles were barely holding on. Clint squinted up at her, shielding his eyes from the sun. He was used to being recognized, but usually by tourists with cameras, not children with such serious expressions. Her name was Jessie, as she later told him, but at that moment, she just stood there, nervously clenching her fists. "And who might you be, kid?" he asked in his raspy voice, trying to sound gruff but with a hint of curiosity. "I need your help," Jessie said, swallowing her words. Her eyes were red, as if she'd been crying recently. "My dad. He's really sick. The doctors say he needs medicine, but we don't have the money. I saw you on TV. You're a hero, right? You can help, can't you?" Clint frowned. Throughout his long career, he'd heard hundreds of requests, from autographs to film roles, but this was different. This was real. He looked at her trembling hands and felt something tighten in his chest. But instead of brushing it off or making empty promises, he decided to dig deeper. "Where's your dad now?" he asked, slowly rising from the bench. His knees cracked, reminding him of his age. "At home. It's not far, just 2 blocks, Jessie replied, pointing toward an old residential area where the asphalt was cracked and the houses looked like they hadn't been repaired since the 80s. "All right, lead the way," Clint said shortly. He didn't know why he agreed. Maybe it was the look in her eyes, a mix of desperation and childlike belief that heroes from the screen could fix everything. They walked in silence. Jessie moved quickly, her short strides contrasting with Clint's slow but steady pace. The air smelled of dust and overfried grease from a nearby diner. On the corner stood a man holding a Veterans Against Biden sign, shouting loudly about healthcare reform. Clint grimaced. Politics always annoyed him, especially when it crept into real life. When they arrived at Jessie's house, a one-story shack with peeling paint and a broken window patched with tape, Clint immediately sensed the gravity of the situation. Inside, it smelled of dampness and medicine. On an old couch lay a man in his mid-40s, thin and pale. His breathing was labored and raspy, and beside him on the floor sat a bowl filled with blood-stained tissues. "Daddy, I brought him," Jessie cried, rushing to his side. The man tried to lift his head but only coughed, covering his mouth with his hand. "Who is that?" he rasped, looking at Clint with clouded eyes. "I'm Clint," the actor replied, surveying the room. On the table lay empty pill bottles, overdue bills marked in red, and a letter from the insurance company stamped, "Coverage denied." "Your daughter says you're sick. What's going on?" "Lungs," the man exhaled. "Fibrosis. The doctors say I need a new drug, but it costs thousands. And we—" He trailed off, closing his eyes, from pain or shame. Clint clenched his jaw. He knew how the system worked. Veterans like this man, Clint noticed a military patch hanging on the wall, were often abandoned when it came to expensive treatments. Politicians promised the moon, but in reality, the people who gave their health for their country rotted in places like this. "Why won't insurance pay?" Clint asked, picking up the letter. "They say the drug's experimental." "Not covered," the man replied, his voice trembling with anger. "I've begged charities, but the wait list is 6 months long." Clint looked at Jessie, who stood by her father, holding his hand. Her eyes were shining with tears, but she didn't cry. She stood strong, like a little soldier. And then there was a knock at the door. Loud and insistent. "Open up, Tom. I know you're in there," a gruff male voice called from outside. Tom, Jessie's father, flinched. Jessie ran to the window and whispered, "That's Mr. Harris. He wants us to leave. We're 2 months behind on rent." Clint walked to the door and opened it. Standing there was a heavy-set man in a cheap suit, red-faced, with a fat cigar between his lips. Harris clearly wasn't expecting to see anyone but Tom. "Who the hell are you, old man?" he barked, blowing out a puff of smoke. "Someone who's here right now," Clint replied calmly, his voice quiet but sharp as a blade. "What's the problem?" "The problem is that Bum hasn't paid." Harris jabbed a finger toward Tom. "He's got a week to clear out, or I'm tossing their stuff on the street." "He's sick," Clint said, without raising his voice. "Can't you see that?" "I don't give a damn. This is business, not a shelter." Harris stepped forward but stopped when Clint didn't move an inch. "Business," Clint repeated, eyes narrowing. "Throwing a sick veteran and his daughter out, that's your business?" Harris froze for a moment, then quickly regained himself. "Mind your own damn business, old man. Or you'll regret it." Clint smiled, that cold, familiar smile people remembered from Dirty Harry. But instead of throwing a punch, he pulled out his phone and started recording. "Say that again," he said. "Louder. For everyone who might want to hear it." Harris paled. He didn't know who this man was, but he sensed it would be better to back off. "1 week," he muttered and left, slamming the gate behind him. Clint turned back to Tom and Jessie. Tom stared at him in disbelief, and Jessie whispered softly, "Thank you." "It's not over yet," Clint replied, sitting down next to the couch. "We need to do something about your meds, Tom. And about Harris." He didn't know how far the story would take him, but one thing was clear, he wasn't backing down. Clint Eastwood sat on a creaky chair in the cramped living room of Tom and Jessie, holding an old army patch that Tom had handed him with a trembling hand. The patch bore faded letters, 101st Airborne Division. Tom spoke of his service in Iraq in 2003, how he had breathed dust and smoke from burning oil wells, and how, years later, it had caught up to him in the form of pulmonary fibrosis. Clint listened silently, nodding occasionally. He had made movies about war, but this wasn't cinematic drama. This was reality, raw and unedited. Meanwhile, Jessie was boiling water on the old stove to make tea. Her small movements were quick but careful. Clearly, she was used to managing things on her own. Clint noticed how she kept glancing at her father, as if afraid he would disappear the moment she looked away. "I thought the government took care of guys like you," Clint said, handing the patch back to Tom. Tom gave a bitter smile and coughed into his fist. "Took care of me? They gave me a medal and a pension that barely covers bread and water. And when I asked for help with meds, they said I'm not a priority. Budget cuts, they say. Meanwhile, I'm here with my lungs falling apart." Clint clenched his fists. He wasn't naive, he knew the system was rotten. But hearing it from someone who had sacrificed their health for the country felt like a punch to the gut. He got up and walked to the window, looking out at the street. The sun was setting, painting the sky blood-red. A dog barked in the distance, and from a neighboring house came the smell of fried meat, someone preparing dinner, unaware of the quiet tragedy just steps away. "How much do the meds cost?" Clint asked without turning around. Tom sighed. $2,000 a month. And that's just the start. Then there's tests, oxygen equipment. I tried to sell my car, but it got repossessed for debt. Clint turned to him, his gaze firm as stone. "What if I pay for it?" Tom and Jessie froze. Jessie nearly dropped the cup in her hands. "What?" Tom asked, as if he hadn't heard him right. I said I'll pay for your medication. For the first month. After that, we'll see, Clint repeated, his voice calm but resolute. You. Serious. Tom tried to sit up straighter, but another fit of coughing bent him in half. Jesse rushed to his side, steadying him by the shoulders. I'm not joking, Clint replied. But there's a condition. You tell me everything about that insurance company and how they screwed you over. And we make them pay for the rest. Tom looked at him like he was seeing a ghost. Jessie suddenly ran up to Clint and wrapped her arms around his waist, hugging him so tightly he nearly lost his balance. Thank you, thank you, thank you, she whispered, her voice trembling with tears. Clint awkwardly patted her on the head. He wasn't used to this kind of emotion. His movie characters usually kept it all bottled up. But here, in this tiny shack, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: responsibility. Not for a script, but for real people. All right, kid, let go, he muttered, but a trace of warmth flickered in his eyes. We need to move fast. He pulled out his phone and dialed the number of an old friend, a lawyer named Roy Jenkins. Roy was one of the few people who still remembered Clint from the days of Unforgiven, and wasn't afraid to take on tough cases. Roy, I need your help, Clint said when he answered. There's a veteran here, and some insurance bastards left him to rot. Can you get to Phoenix by tomorrow? Clint, are you wrapped up in another one of your stories? Roy chuckled. All right, I'll be there at 10. But you owe me a steak. Deal, Clint said and hung up. Tom and Jesse looked at him, a mix of disbelief and hope in their eyes. But just then, someone knocked at the door again, this time louder. Clint walked over and opened it. It wasn't Harris, it was two men in cheap suits, with faces that promised nothing good. You the old man sticking his nose where it doesn't belong? Asked one of them, tall, with a tattoo on his neck. Harris says you've been meddling. Clint didn't back down. He stood straight, his posture still carrying that quiet strength that used to scare villains on screen. And who are you? His personal guard, he asked calmly. We're here to make sure you understand, either you walk away, or you'll regret it, said the shorter one, broad-shouldered and trying to intimidate. Clint gave them that cold smile the whole world knew. Boys, I've been filming scenes with guys like you since you were in diapers. Wanna see if I still know how to fight? They froze. Something in his tone, calm, yet steel-hard, made them hesitate. But then Jesse's voice rang out from inside. Don't. Please, don't hurt him. She ran to the doorway, standing between Clint and the men. Her small figure trembled, but her eyes burned with determination. My dad is sick, and you're trying to throw us out. Why are you being so cruel? She shouted, her voice cracking. The men looked at each other. The tattooed one frowned, but took a step back. This ain't our idea, kid. Harris pays, we do, he muttered. Then tell Harris I'm not leaving, Clint cut in. And if he wants trouble, I'll give him more than he can handle. They lingered a moment longer, then turned and left, throwing one last threat over their shoulders. You'll regret this, old man. Clint closed the door and turned to Jesse. You're brave, kid. But don't get in the middle like that again, got it? She nodded, wiping her tears with her sleeve. Tom, who had heard everything from the couch, said quietly, I don't know how to thank you, Mr. Eastwood. Don't thank me, Clint cut him off. Thank me when we win this war. He sat back down and started to think. Paying for the meds was just the first step, an unexpected move no one saw coming from an old actor. But the real battle was ahead, against the insurance company, Harris, and maybe those thugs. Clint knew he couldn't do it alone, but he wasn't about to give up. That night, he stayed in Tom and Jesse's house, sleeping on an old mattress in the corner. As he drifted off to the sounds of the Phoenix night, buzzing AC units and distant sirens, he thought this might be the most real role of his life. The next morning, the sun over Phoenix blazed even hotter than the day before. Inside Tom and Jesse's house, The air was thick with heat and tension. Clint Eastwood had woken up early, his old back aching from a night on the mattress, but he didn't complain. He stood by the stove, holding a cup of instant coffee, when Jessie ran up to him with a wide smile. "I told the neighbors you're here," she said, her eyes shining. "They didn't believe me, but they promised to come see for themselves." Clint frowned. "Kid, I'm not a traveling circus. We've got business to handle, not a show to put on." But Jessie only grinned wider. "They want to help. Mrs. Rodriguez from the third house said she knows a journalist from a local paper. Maybe he could write about Dad." Clint paused, considering. The idea wasn't bad. If they made enough noise, the insurance company and Harris might back off. He nodded. "All right. But first, I'm talking to Roy." Roy Jenkins, a lawyer with gray at his temples and a sharp gaze, arrived at 10 as promised. He walked into the house with a briefcase in hand and immediately took stock of the situation. Tom on the couch, Jessie with the kettle, Clint with a coffee cup and a face that spelled trouble for their enemies. "So you're playing the hero again, Clint?" Roy joked, sitting down at the table. "Tell me what's going on." Clint laid it all out: Tom's illness, the insurance denial, Harris's threats. Then he added what he had done the day before. "I paid for his meds. $2,000. But that's not a solution. Those bastards need to answer for this." Roy whistled. "You serious? You could have just written a check and gone home." "I don't run from problems," Clint snapped. "And you know that." Roy nodded and opened his briefcase, pulling out papers. "All right. We've got a shot. The insurance company denied coverage, claiming the drug was experimental, but I checked, it's FDA approved. That's their mistake, and we can sue. And as for Harris, if he hired thugs, that's intimidation. We can take him down for that too." Tom, who had been silent until then, lifted his head. "You think this will work?" "If Clint's in, we've got every chance," Roy replied with a grin. While Roy prepared the paperwork, Jessie ran to the neighbors. Within an hour, the yard in front of the house was filled with people. Mrs. Rodriguez, an elderly Latina with a cane, brought her grandson with a camera. Old Mr. Crow, a Vietnam vet, showed up with a folding chair and muttered that the system's always been rotten. Several more families with kids and dogs gathered to see Clint. Some recognized him. Most just wanted to support Tom. Clint stepped onto the porch, holding a phone in his hand. He went live on social media, something he had never done before. His voice, gravelly and firm, rang out over the crowd. "I'm Clint Eastwood. I'm standing here in Phoenix, in front of a veteran's house, among the system abandoned. Tom served in the 101st, and now he can't breathe without medicine that costs $2,000 a month. The insurance denied him. His landlord is threatening to evict him and his daughter. I paid for his meds, but that's not my job. It's your job, the job of those who promise to care for people. So where are you?" He turned the camera toward the crowd. People began cheering, waving, holding up handmade signs Jessie had drawn with markers. "Help Tom. Insurance equals thieves." Mrs. Rodriguez raised her cane and shouted, "We're with you, Clint." The stream hit thousands of views within minutes. The local journalist Jessie had called was already recording an interview with Tom. Clint stood back, watching as the little girl who had begged him for help yesterday now led an entire army of neighbors. But then Harris showed up. He parked his beat-up pickup at the corner and stepped out, his face red with rage. Behind him were the same two goons. "What the hell kind of circus is this, old man?" he barked, pushing through the crowd. "Think you can scare me with cameras?" Clint calmly stepped forward, his gaze cold as the desert at night. "I'm not scaring anyone. I'm showing the truth. And if you think you can throw a sick veteran out on the street, go ahead and try. But now, everyone's watching. Harris stopped. The crowd murmured, someone shouted, "Shame!" One of the goons tried to step closer, but Mr. Crow stood in his way with his chair and growled. "Go ahead, punk. I fought guys like you back in '68. Harris realized he was losing. He spat on the ground and muttered, "This isn't over." But as he turned to leave, Jesse ran forward and called out, "Wait. Mr. Harris, my dad doesn't want to fight with you. He just wants to live. Maybe we can talk? Work something out." Her voice was so sincere that even Harris froze. The crowd fell silent. Clint walked up beside Jesse and put a hand on her shoulder. "She's right. We're not looking for war. But you've got a choice, be the enemy or be part of the solution." Harris stood there, fists clenched. Then he exhaled and said quietly, "I'll think about it." He got into his truck and drove off, leaving everyone stunned. Jesse turned to Clint and whispered, "Do you think he'll agree?" "I don't know, kid," Clint replied. "But you just gave him a chance to change. Not everyone would have done that." That same day, Roy filed a lawsuit against the insurance company, attaching Clint's video and Tom's testimony. By evening, the story had made the news. Clint Eastwood fights for veteran in Phoenix. Social media exploded with support. People began donating to the account Jesse had set up with Mrs. Rodriguez's help. Within hours, they had raised $10,000, enough to cover the medicine and rent debt. Clint was sitting on the porch as the sun set, and Jesse brought him a glass of lemonade. "Will you stay?" she asked. "No, kid. It's time I went home. But I'm leaving you, Roy. And if anything goes wrong, call me," he said, taking the lemonade. Tom stepped onto the porch, leaning against the wall. His breathing was still heavy, but there was a spark in his eyes. "You gave us a chance, Clint. I won't forget that." "Don't thank me," Clint said, nodding at Jesse. "She started it all." He stood up, adjusted his baseball cap, and walked to his car. The crowd saw him off with applause, but Clint didn't look back. He got behind the wheel and drove off, leaving behind a city that would never be the same. But the story didn't end there. The next day, the insurance company announced they would review Tom's case due to public pressure. Harris called Tom and offered a rent deferral. And Jessie, holding the phone in her hands, recorded a short video. "Thank you to everyone who helped. And if you're in trouble, don't stay silent. Maybe there's a Clint Eastwood nearby. Or maybe your own Jesse."